Because we like to start on time and end on time, I would like to welcome everyone and say good evening to you. My name is Janessa Williams, and on behalf of the Bloomington Normal Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, our President Golene Lawrence, our Social Action Chair Renee Thompson, the entire committee, and our entire chapter, I want to thank you all for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for the third in a series of our community conversations. This evening, we are blessed to have two dynamic, accomplished civil rights attorneys join us for tonight's conversation as we delve into the topic, what does justice look like? A few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded. When you registered and when you came in, you gave your consent to be recorded. If you wish not to be recorded, please exit the room at this time. We asked you to submit questions when you registered, and boy, did you. We have enough questions for this to be an entire day-long session. However, since we're committed to a 1-hour conversation, some of your questions may not be addressed during the conversation, and we will not be taking questions during the conversation at this time. At the end of the conversation, you'll have the opportunity to complete a short survey, and I'll give you more information on that later. We ask everyone to please remain muted throughout the conversation. And now, without further ado, I am so very pleased to introduce you to my friend and moderator for the evening, civil rights attorney Keenan J. Saulter. Keenan will introduce himself and then get into the conversation with our other esteemed guest, attorney Daryl Washington, who will also introduce himself. Keenan.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I want to thank the Bloomington Normal Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta for asking me to participate in this important discussion. To your chapter president, to your social action chair, and I'm going to take a bit of personal privilege and recognize a former president of your chapter, my cousin, Dr. Crystal Shelvin, whom I love dearly, who I think is on the Zoom tonight. As Janessa mentioned, my name is Keenan Saulter. I graduated from Illinois State University for my undergraduate studies and then proceeded to Howard University School of Law. I believe a lot of you love Howard here. Even if you didn't attend, you may have a special connection as it relates to your organizational foundation. So, and I've been practicing law since 2000. So this is my 22nd year of practice. I've tried multiple cases. My co-panelist is on trial right now. And that shows a high level of commitment because trial is both emotionally, physically, and psychologically draining. And there's a lot of things to keep straight. And the fact that he will come and pour into us this evening is admirable. I've not had a chance to meet him in person, but definitely looking forward to that day. I run a small law firm here in the Chicagoland area called Saulter Law PC, and we are committed to working on behalf of individuals who have been harmed by the fault of someone else in the civil rights arena and personal injury. So I'll allow Attorney Washington to introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Keenan.
Someone told me there's an echo. I'm going to mute when I'm not speaking, but if everyone else makes sure that they can mute themselves out, maybe even you, Janessa, just to be safe.
Thanks, Keenan, Janessa, Renee, and to the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta. I'd just like to say thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this panel tonight. I hope that this is going to be something that we can all learn from. I'm currently here based out of Dallas. I have 1 year on Keenan. I've actually been practicing law for 23 years. Started practicing in '99. And just to give you a little background, when I first started practicing, I was more on the corporate side. I was working in mergers and acquisitions. At the time I started, everything was all about IPOs. I found out early on that was not the area that I wanted to be in because I could not make the change in my community. Like I said, was one of the reasons why I went to law school. So I got into litigation. It was not until Hurricane Katrina that my practice really changed. It was at that time when individuals from New Orleans had to come to Dallas. They had to evacuate New Orleans, come to Dallas, and they was faced with a situation that I've never seen people have to deal with. But it was this one lady who came into our firm. She had been evicted, Keenan, and she needed help, pro bono help. And I will quote, the law firm that I was working for at that time said that we do not represent those type of people. And I did not understand what they meant by that, but it was at that time that I realized that it was time for me to go because our community truly needed attorneys fighting. And ever since that time, I've been working primarily in civil rights law. You know, Austin, Keenan, and I know you have that same feeling. Oftentimes, I look in the mirror and say, why me? Because it's very difficult. It's very tough. But, you know, I just look forward to participate and just share with you guys how I think we may be able to make some changes in this community, in this country.
Thank you very much, Attorney Washington. So I'm going to start us off with a very difficult topic, but something that is important and quite frankly gets to the critical issues of life and death. So we know by watching the media, sadly on a daily basis, that African Americans are killed at nearly a double rate by police officers in this country than white individuals. And we know from a demographic standpoint, African Americans represent anywhere from 12 to maybe 13% of the population, certainly in some metropolitan areas, maybe higher, but none of those numbers justify the outpacing of white individuals of being shot, killed by police in a 2-to-1 fashion. So Attorney Washington, I'll ask you first, what can we do? What proactive steps can we take to address this issue? And I know that question alone, just so everyone's aware, we could talk about this question by itself for the rest of the hour, but we'll try not to do that.
I mean, Keenan, I think honestly, what it's going to take is going to take a collective effort. It's going to take all of us coming together. And because let me tell you what happened with this situation. Until somebody is personally impacted by it, until it's their family members or a friend or someone that they know very well, it's not really a big deal, honestly. You know, we go out there and we chant and we talk about it, and then people basically move on. This is something that is happening in this country that we can't afford to move on from. We have to stay involved. Give you an example. I'm in trial right now, and I have to look at a mother, father, and a wife gone through a trial where they're seeing their son, how their son died. But then I look in the back of the courtroom, I see police officers who are sitting in there supporting their fellow officers, and I wonder, where are the people in the community? Why aren't they in there? And believe me, when people from the community come out, black, white, brown, it makes a difference at these trials. Keenan tell you, it makes a difference with the way judges rule on objections, the way they handle this trial, because it forces them to be transparent. So again, we have to be able to all come in and be involved in this, and not just get involved when it's somebody that you personally know, or it's a case that the media says that we need to all get involved with.
Sure. And so I would add to that. I think Daryl, I'll call you Daryl, is absolutely right. You know, the other thing we need to do is, just like if you look at what's happened in Hollywood over the last 20, 30 years, we've seen the lack of proper depictions of African Americans, Latinos, Asians, women often on film, because the writer's room was predominantly white male, right? That's the same thing that happens in politics, police forces, prosecutors' offices. We need to get involved, quite frankly, before something happens. So prosecutors are very necessary. So state attorneys in Illinois, district attorneys in Texas, but there's some folks who are more committed to progressive prosecution. And I'm not getting overly political here. It's more so a way to approach the job. We need African-American law enforcement officers. I've seen firsthand, I know Daryl has seen firsthand what happens on a scene when there's a young African-American male or female, or Latino male or female, and the entirety of the response team is all white. In Chicago, for example, what typically happens is you've got people who didn't grow up in the areas that they police in. So what that means is I don't see this particular subject as someone who could be like my son, my daughter, my nephew, my brother, myself. I don't see that person as being human. And sadly, and this is not some attack on police officers, but what Daryl just said about who's in the back of the courtroom, it's almost as if it doesn't register with the officers that someone's life has been taken. This is a purely us against them mentality, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's not the way to for us to analyze it. And quite frankly, it's just not the time for us to get involved only after something horrific has happened. We've got to go to the police board meetings. We've got, in Chicago, they call it the CAPS meetings, the community policing meetings. You got to get involved on the ground level. You want that commander to know who you are, because it's much more likely that he or she will take you seriously, know that you care about your community, your alderman, your committee person, whoever it is in elected office. If the more active you are, the more vocal you are, in a relatively respectful manner, I've had my issues with politicians, the more likely you are to get heard and to be heard from in a way that's more positive. And I just encourage all of us, we can get weary of the politics, but the politics are absolutely important. So I'm going to move on to our next question. African-American parents have had the talk forever with their children about how to interact with law enforcement, how to keep them safe. What advice should we give to young people or not so young people about police encounters? The most common one, Daryl, as you know, is the traffic stop.
I mean, one of the things, Keenan, and I just had to speak at a program for Jack and Jill. I was talking to some of the Bows. And it's sad that we have to have these conversations with our young kids, but they're necessary. I know sometimes parents want to shield the badness of this world away from their children, but you have to do it, and you have to do it very early. You have to have a boot camp with your kids and give them the ammunition that is needed to be successful. The one conversation that I was having with kids, if they're ever stopped by the police officer, I want them to remember this constitutional right. And I told them, you have a right to remain silent. And oftentimes a lot of kids don't know this, because all of us, and it's not just kids, it's adults who are guilty of this as well. We are accustomed to talking our way out of something. And when we're dealing with law enforcement, we feel like we can take that same skill and that same talent and talk our way out of it. And, whenever you are encountering a police officer, and I tell kids all the time, this is not the time to challenge law enforcement. And I know it's very difficult to say it, but I have to say it because a lot of people don't say it. I don't want you challenging law enforcement because, and I know Keenan has said, I'm sick and tired of having to represent the estate of someone who's killed. I'm tired of it, very young kids. So I would rather you not say a word and then we pursue somebody who may have harassed you later, but I'm able to call you as a witness, as opposed to me having to call your friends and your parents to talk about what type of person you are. So when you are having those encounters, it's just best just to remain silent.
Sure. I advise folks, and I follow this advice myself. If an officer approaches my vehicle, my hands are on the steering wheel. And one of the things, and I've had more training, I've had more experience, life experience. One of the things that I'm actually going to try to do is I'm going to actually try to turn the temperature down. Many people don't understand. Law enforcement officers are actually taught and trained in conflict de-escalation. But in certain instances, their adrenaline, their egos, the nature of the situation, i.e. who they've stopped, it gets the best of them. So everything you can do within your power to make that officer feel that you are not a threat. And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth, right? Because as Joe just said, we can talk about all of the issues that occurred that were wrong in court. But when you're out there on the street in a stop, or you've been stopped by someone as you're walking down the sidewalk or at a store or what have you, it's those officers and their weapons. And so we do everything we can to make it home alive. So we put our hands on the steering wheel. Hey, can you get your registration out for me? Officer, the registration is in the glove compartment. Is it okay if I reach for it? They'll actually recognize that as a sign of respect for their safety, because they're taught, quite frankly, the traffic stop is the most dangerous thing that they do, except for probably serving warrants, right? So they come to that traffic stop with a high degree of anxiety, particularly when, quite frankly, they may be stopping young, car full of young African-American and Latino young men. I'm putting the focus on those because that's their training, that's their thought process. And so everything you can do to kind of dial down the situation, for someone who has a bit of a lead foot, I've been able to get a lot of warnings that way just by being respectful and then understanding most officers are good people and they want to get home that night. And if you can show some empathy for that, that goes a long way. I agree, Sarah. And they told us not to person.
I'm reading what Sarah said. It really is a heavy burden to put on kids at such an early age. But, sadly, it's just the reality of life. And, I know how difficult it is now for parents when their kids leave home to have to wonder, will they come back home?
Yeah.
Or will their telephone ring? I mean, and it's just so difficult. And really, you would not think in 2022 that we would be having to have these type of conversations. I never, and to be honest, when I was a teenager, we didn't have to have conversations about police brutality. I don't know whether it was the cell phones and people being able to record these interactions where we were able to really see that this is not a situation that's just starting to exist. This is something that has been going on for quite some time. But, if there's no video of the encounter, it makes it that much difficult. But we have to save our children. And this is one reason why, despite that we are in the meeting right now for our trial day tomorrow, I'd rather be on this conference call right now with you all trying to figure out a way how to keep me out of this courtroom, because I look forward to the day when I'm able to say I don't have to practice civil rights anymore.
Yeah, you and me both. So I want to get into a heavier topic, not heavier, but a deeper topic as it relates to the law and the legal analysis. Qualified immunity. So since the murder of George Floyd, many in the public have heard this term tossed around, qualified immunity. So I'll throw to you, Daryl, what is qualified immunity? Explain that to our guests. And then I'll piggyback maybe on some of the movement that's afoot to address the issue legally.
Right now, I'll try to explain it as easy as I can. Judges, district attorneys, they have what is called absolute immunity, meaning that, they are immune from lawsuits. Officers have what is known as qualified immunity. And basically what it means is that if the court finds that an officer's actions were objectively reasonable, in other words, that they can prove that the use of deadly force was justified, then they are entitled to what is known as qualified immunity. Officers are not entitled to qualified immunity only if they are known to be plainly incompetent or knowingly violate the law. But this is very difficult. I'll tell you guys, it's a very tough hurdle to cross, because not only, let's just say we prove we're able to show that an officer used excessive force. It goes a step further. We now have to be able to show that there was clearly established law. In other words, the officer would have had to been placed on notice that his actions would violate clearly established law. And when I say clearly established law, that means they are wanting us to be able to find a case that's almost on point to be able to show that this officer had ample notice that his or her actions will be violating your constitutional rights. And it seems simple, but it's not. I mean, so many officers kill people and they are able to get off because of qualified immunity. And I will tell you, if you don't have any witnesses, if there are no video, it makes it so very difficult. And for every George Floyd, for every Breonna Taylor, for Botham Jean, Jordan Edwards, there are thousands of people, thousands of cases that you guys never hear about that's happening because, and nobody will take the case because they're just that difficult. Now, I really want that to change because everybody deserves justice and we can't get discouraged by qualified immunity. And we need, I hope by the end of this call, that we're able to convince some of you all, to convince your friends, convince your kids to go to law school and get into civil rights law.
Yeah. That's a great legal analysis, Daryl. Qualified. So if you think about professions, if you are unfortunate enough to get into an accident with a large truck driver, a truck driver driving a large vehicle, and it is completely a mistake that this trucker injured you, you're still able to hold that person liable. So what other professions in the world, in the United States, allow someone to make mistakes such as grabbing a taser, which doesn't have the same shape, weight, or even color as a firearm? Someone who's been on a police force for well over 20 years, who has to know the difference, who's been trained in the use of both of them. What other legal doctrine can you think of that allows someone to make a mistake of that nature and it's okay, and there's someone dead on the other side of that? So what can we do? So in Congress, there is currently pending, not moving, but pending, the George Floyd Policing Act, I believe that's the proper name for the bill.
Right.
So that's one of the things that would attack qualified immunity. However, on the state level, I think a decent amount of us are in Illinois. You may recall back in 2020, in 2021, the Illinois state legislature and the governor signed the bill. Was a broad and sweeping change to criminal justice procedures in the state of Illinois. And it was progressive and it was absolutely needed. Changed some things that have been on the books since before Daryl or I even thought about going to law school. And so that's what I meant earlier. We've got to get involved. Our voice has to be heard, because these things, qualified immunity was effectively made up by the Supreme Court. And I said it how I meant it. It was made up, right? It was a doctrine that was written into an analysis of an opinion about a set of facts. And the Supreme Court said that officer has qualified immunity. And there we have it. But Congress can take it away. Individual states can take it away. And so that's where us getting involved and knowing what these things are can be so critical. And you're doing something right now to educate, become more educated about these topics, right? That's where it starts to kind of have a good working knowledge of what these things mean when you hear them mentioned in the media, when you hear them mentioned in forums. And so next, okay, I want to do something about that. So I'll move to our next topic. Wow. Okay. What is critical race theory and how do we combat its being weaponized? Daryl, that's another one we can talk about for an hour. But give us the thumbnail sketch of what critical race theory is, and then I'll try to attack how we combat its being weaponized against us.
I mean, when I really think about it, Keenan, I'm just trying to figure out why is there so much hesitation? Why is it's being resisted by individuals? But again, I think the critical race theory, man, is something that the people who have inflicted the bad past on us is trying to prevent it from being taught in the classrooms. And I think we definitely need this to happen.
Yeah, and it's it's a really deep conversation. Many of you know the critical race theory is something that's taught in law schools, right? So critical race theory is really about a legal analysis of the ways in which racism and white supremacy have been ingrained in the laws of this country. Any student of the Constitution, even an eighth grader who's got to pass the Constitution test, knows that racism was woven into the very thread of the Constitution. We know that. Sexism as well, right? We know that the Constitution, while it says certain things about all, it really only meant all property owning white males. And so what critical race theory attempts to do is to act as if those things never happened, because it makes some people feel guilty. It's ironic. Those same people typically call all of us snowflakes. They cry over monuments to people who backed the South in the Civil War, but they don't want the actual history of what occurred to come out. And it's one of the reasons why I believe that is because it doesn't take a long time to start to trace back some of these people, their family history, quite frankly, right? Depending on where you grew up. There's people in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now on both sides of that bombing, those bombings, who can trace back their lineage easily to the 1920s. I attend a church right now that's been around since 1919, and we can easily trace our lineage back basically a generation and a half. My grandparents were born before 1919, just like I'm sure many of yours were. So I think it's fascinating that we are the history that we don't love, we try to bury it. And again, that's something, unfortunately, the burden typically falls to the oppressed, which is not fair, but that's not anything that's new to the oppressed. And so I think we have to just fight for, if we just teach actual history, just what is available. It's not a bent toward one group or the other. It's not meant to make anybody feel guilty, but it's a disservice to both or all people if we don't truly know what occurred, because if we don't, we're doomed to repeat it, right? So go ahead.
Yeah, and the fact that they wanted to just think that racism is normal. I mean, and just something that we should not have to talk about and just move on with life. And I just think it's a conversation that we need to have. It's a conversation that needs to be taught. I will tell you, one of my co-counsels in this trial is a Caucasian attorney. And, he and I have a lot of conversations about racism. We have these very conversations when it comes time to select jurors, because we see life out of set of different lenses. I mean, the way people look at me and the way people look at him is totally different. So he doesn't feel the things that we have, that we experience. So, when we talk about it, I think it makes a big difference. But I just want to say this also, not to get off the subject, because I touched on something that I just want to make sure that I don't forget. And that is serving on juries. I don't know if this was a question, but I made a promise to myself that anytime that I would talk to a group of people, I would talk about serving on juries. And I will tell you, oftentimes, we as African Americans, we talk about how we want to make a change, how we are tired of these injustices, and how, the system is not for us. And I can't tell you, and I know Keenan's going to have the same experience. I can't tell you the number of times when they are bringing the jury pool into the courtroom, and I look around and I'm wanting to see that we have a diverse group of people to select from, because it's not that African Americans are going to rule in our favor. It's just that we feel just a little more comfortable when they're back there deliberating, that people are going to be bringing a variety of life experiences into that room. And what we need to do, and I challenge the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta with this, we need to teach our communities how not to get eliminated from serving on juries. We need to teach our communities how to serve, the importance of serving on juries. And if you don't believe me, just find a civil or criminal trial that's about to start and go through the process called voir dire. And look how look how hard attorneys work to try to eliminate Black people from juries. So you have to ask your question, why are they working so hard to eliminate Blacks from juries? And the answer is because they don't want you to serve on the juries. And nothing is more disappointing than when the judge asks this question, is there any reason why anyone can't serve on the jury? And Keenan knows this. Whenever the judge asks this question, I promise you, I just put my head down and I start praying. And I just say, God, just please touch their heart and please put in them not to try to get off this jury. And when the judge asks that question, great majority of the time, it's individuals looking like myself or Keenan who are raising their hands and figuring out ways to not serve on the jury. And if we want to see a difference in this legal system, then you have to be a part of the legal system.
So I would be remiss if I didn't pick up here. I've got a couple anecdotes I want to give you to show you the real life impact of this. Literally this week, 4 years ago, I have a very similar experience to Daryl. I have a very good friend of mine, a white gentleman who I've tried multiple cases with. And we tried a civil rights case for a young man who was shot by some Chicago police officers while he was riding in a car. The police officer stories, quite frankly, just didn't make any sense. They matched the forensic or physical evidence. But anyway, we picked the first jury. You notice I said the first jury. And we were talking about the selection process and kind of going through our notes. And my good friend, Craig, there was a young woman, probably about 24, 25 years old. She was a nanny from a Western suburb, young white woman. And me and Craig were kind of talking, and I was like, I couldn't define it. There's a lot of money that trial lawyers can spend on jury consultants. You guys maybe watch Bull, which is a bunch of bull, but whatever, I digress. So there was just something about her that I didn't feel comfortable. But, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but we have challenges, peremptory challenges. We have to kind of use those strategically. We got to say some of them just in case there's somebody who really comes through on the jury pool at the last second who we have to get out for whatever reason. And so I relented. Craig said, she's fine. And he could relate to her. But our client was about a 16, 17-year-old African-American male. So we tried the case for about a week. And the jury comes back hung 11-1. And guess who hung it? So fast forward, this is 4 years ago. Fast forward about 3 weeks later, we tried the case again. And I felt better about this jury because in Cook County, thankfully, we're able to get diverse juries. I'm not looking for all Black juries, right? That's not my point. All Black male juries. I don't want that demographic. But if I have an African-American client or me as an African-American lawyer, I want to speak to people who at least are diverse. Right. And so 3 weeks later, we come back to try the case again. And I literally knew we had won based on the knock. So in Cook County, you're in the courtroom and the jury room is right off the courtroom. And the way the door knocked really loudly, I knew we had won the case. I'm gonna tell you why. Because we picked a juror who I felt very comfortable with, who literally could have been my father because he was about the same age as my dad, lived in a similar area of the Cook County region, served in Vietnam just like my father. And I heard that knock and I recognized that knock for like 25 years, like growing up with my father, right? You know what I mean? I knew who knocked on that door, which meant he was the foreman. So he was the foreman, and we turned out what ended up being the 6th largest civil rights verdict in all of Illinois that year, 2018, a case that we had just effectively not been able to prove to 12 other citizens 3 weeks earlier. Jury service absolutely matters. I cannot emphasize that enough. That was not one of our questions, but I'm so glad he brought it up. So I'm going to move on to another one of our questions. So this one is difficult. Why are some African Americans oblivious to the fact that racism still exists? This is a psychological study. I don't know how we can answer this one, Daryl, but take a shot.
I can't. I honestly, it's hard to answer that one without being too critical.
Yes.
I don't know. Some people, I see it too, where people believe there's not a such thing as racism.
There's a guy who wears a black robe in Washington who doesn't seem to believe it.
I know a lot of people wear some black robes that don't believe it, but and I better be careful about how I say this because exactly. I don't know who's on the Zoom. I mean, Renee and Janessa, did y'all make everybody sign like a confidentiality provision? There's not nobody from the news on this, right? But I don't know.
I'm going to take a moderator's privilege. Let's go. Let's move on from that one because, like I said, we can talk about that one for a while.
Yes. So.
Here's a good question. What charities, as it relates to these issues, are best to support? And you've been doing a lot of you're on trial. I'm going to pick up the load for you a little bit here. So I know we have the Bloomington Normal president of the NAACP on the Zoom. I believe she's a member of the Bloomington Normal Alumni chapter. So the Legal Defense Fund is the NAACP Legal Defense Fund is one of the preeminent civil rights legal advocacy organizations in the world, quite frankly, right? So that's a charity you certainly could give to. The other thing to be mindful of is that in your local area, it could be a local branch of the NAACP. I know in larger metropolitan areas, Bloomington Normal, Chicago, Dallas, you're going to find even some legal aid organizations that specifically work toward civil rights. And the other thing is we don't always consider these things civil rights, but access to justice is a civil rights issue. So what I mean when I say that, I mean that, and I'm basing this on my 22 years, there are people, if you skew toward being poorer or being a minority, it's far less likely several attorneys, right? Me and Daryl collectively probably know thousands of attorneys with law school, right? And we interact with attorneys all the time. But for everyday people, that's not necessarily the case. So access to justice is a critical issue. Understanding what your rights are in a situation. So the organization that you give your money to doesn't even have to be strictly a civil rights organization. It could just be a legal aid organization that assists low income people. There are civil rights organizations that work with elderly or folks with disabilities. There are myriad organizations out there that you can give your money to. And all it takes is a little bit of research about their their funding base and the community and populations that they serve. So I think that's at least a good start. And Daryl, you want to chime in on that at all?
No, Keenan, I think you really hit it all. If you're not going to if you can't get out in the streets and be actively involved, then donate if you can. I mean, the NAACP and these organizations, these groups are out there fighting very hard for our rights. A lot of them have to use their own personal funds to go out there. They're missing, time at work. And I think, we have all come far enough to be able to donate and contribute to people. So I just that's just something I think we can do. Colin Kaepernick is doing something that I really want to applaud. I see now that they are going to actually be making a donation to victims of officer-involved shootings, where they're going to be paying for autopsy reports.
Yeah.
Just doing something like that is very important, because, as you know, with the George Floyd case, the manner and cause of his death was totally different from the cause of his death when they were able to get their own independent autopsy conducted. So there's just so many things that can be done. I mean, even with the Deltas, I think something you guys can look at doing is maybe having expungement workshops. There are so many people who are being arrested and get released maybe an hour or two later, and charges are dismissed, but they don't realize that they have an arrest record, because that doesn't go away. So it's not until you gone out and apply for your dream job that a hit comes back and you say, well, I never done nothing. I haven't been convicted of anything, but you were arrested. So because you were arrested, that follows you, even if they let you go. So you want to make sure, if somebody's going to have that type of workshop, I think that is tremendous to contribute to, because it really helps out a large number of people.
Yes. Someone asked a quick question in the chat. So Sheila, in Illinois, I know in order to qualify to be a member of a jury pool, all you have to do is vote. Your name should be on the voter rolls. And yeah, so it's relatively straightforward.
And King, let me just say something also.
Sure.
Just off the jury, and I get right off. If you guys get on the jury pool, just remember these two words: fair and impartial. That's all you want to be able to say if they ask you a question. It's not a time. I mean, they have a new question now that they ask in this trial, Keenan. They say, how many people have been, how many people have had a negative experience with police officers? Well, you know who that was gone towards. I mean, and I'm looking at, I'm saying, that is not your time to talk about your negative experiences. I mean, just keep that to yourself. All we want to know is that you can be fair and impartial. That's the main thing. And let me say, if you can't be fair and impartial, then don't serve on the jury, irrespective of your race. Because as Keenan said, really doesn't matter the race. What matters the most for me is that you can be fair and impartial. So, but again, we just have to have people on the jury.
Absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit. So we've seen over the last 25 to 30 years that police forces have become highly militarized. So I represented a woman in Chicago who was a victim of a wrong raid. And when you look at the beginning of the videos, you see that they're using battering rams, large shields, long guns. The way they're even geared up, you wouldn't know the difference between them going to this woman's house versus if they were kind of doing a raid on somebody looking for a high value target in Afghanistan. Like they look the same, right? And so we've seen the militarization of these police forces. I want you to talk about that, but then secondarily, giving bonus points to applicants who have previously served in the military. And of course, this is not an attack on anyone who served in the military, but what impact does that have on the way that police departments train and do their work in the community?
Well, Keenan, one of the things I have to say, man, is that training word. I honestly don't think they do enough of training. They're putting too much of the funding is used to build up the forces that they have access to, as opposed to using some of that funding to go out and contribute to areas like mental health.
Absolutely.
I think that's a big issue. The trial that I'm dealing with right now involved a 41-year-old African-American male who was killed. Clearly, he was suffering from a mental illness. And the biggest thing, Keenan, when I cross-examine these officers and I talk about, what type of crisis intervention training they have had, and none of those guys can really recite to their training. I know more about crisis intervention than they do. So when I see them spending all that money to get these additional weapons that these officers aren't being trained on the proper use, I mean, that's a huge problem. And to talk about the military, people from the military gone to police departments, and it's not just the military. Here's the biggest problem. I can't tell you how many people have been involved in some type of officer-involved shootings. They get off, nothing happens to them, but those guys have to go to no counseling. So it is not normal to kill someone, then return back to work without any counseling. So now you're talking about people who have killed someone. It's impacting them mentally, but yet we giving them access to these type of weapons that they're using to further injure people, and that's creating a major problem.
Right. So you bring up several good points. So one, and again, this job is difficult, right? Look at the suicide rates. Look at the alcoholism and drug abuse rates. And that's not an attack on police. That is my heart goes out to police because it's difficult. But the way in which they're taught to do the job, you're frowned upon if you say, hey, I'd like to speak to a counselor. I've got a mental health issue I want to address, right? I think taking your point much further, and these are some of the strategies. So we asked about the critical race theory point earlier. The other issue becomes the movement to defund the police. So I don't know any activists. I've seen signs, but I don't know any activists who truly understands what's going on in our communities, who actually wants a scenario where there are no police officer. If something happens and I call 911, I expect somebody to pick up, right? I expect you to send a cruiser out. What they mean though, like in Illinois, because of budget cuts and because of politics, many of the mental health crisis centers, many of the physical like domestic violence shelters, many of the drug and alcohol rehabilitation facilities and treatment facilities have been closed and shuttered over the last 4, 6, 7, 8 years, right? Those are other charities, quite frankly, that people can give to. And what that does is we send a big, large hammer after problems that deserve a hand. If someone's going through a mental health crisis, at some point as a society, we have to analyze, does it actually make sense to send people with guns to that crisis? Because I'm gonna tell you why I say that. You know who deals with people going through mental health crisis all the time without one weapon? Healthcare workers. They do it every day. Go to an emergency room after 10 o'clock p.m. and you're going to likely find someone who's going through a serious mental health crisis, and healthcare workers deal with those issues routinely by themselves. So there's something wrong with our policing and the way we think about policing. And again, like you basically send police into an untenable situation when you do this.
Correct.
Right? Because they're taught to control the situation and gain compliance. Well, someone is a schizophrenic going through an episode. How is that really going to work? How many times have we seen recently where people going through significant mental health episodes and crises are shot and killed by police officers because the police officers, to Daryl's point, aren't trained, not certainly across the board, in how to deal with these things, how to de-escalate. And often family members are the ones, and I know there's a high level of guilt often, are the ones who call the police to try to deal with the situation because they don't know what to do. So go ahead, Daryl.
No, Keenan, I mean, the more you talk about it, man, the more I get frustrated. I mean, it's upsetting, honestly. I can talk to you guys. Keenan can talk to you all about this all night. I'm just going to be very honest with you. These cases are so very difficult. And when you see somebody suffering from a mental illness end up dead, I mean, it's just sad because it really shouldn't happen. You have somebody that's screaming for help, and that's all they need is help. They don't need anybody yelling at them and pointing guns at them, pointing tasers. They really need help. And you know, this is happening so much. And I'm just telling you all, this is why I'm just so excited to be a part of this conversation, because what it does for me, and I know what it does for Keenan, what we do see, I mean, it's a very lonely road. It's not something that you're going to get a lot of accolades for. You know, we see the press conferences, and you guys may see us on TV after there's a justice, I mean, a big settlement or judgment, but it's so much more that goes into this, just so much more. I mean, people don't see when you're up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning fighting for people. And this is why we just need to tell you all we need help. Even if you're not an attorney, there's something that you can do to make a difference in the community. And until, I've always said, when we come together collectively, black, white, brown, we change the world. Absolutely. And I know for a fact, had we not been in the midst of a pandemic, the George Floyd case would have not gone the way it went. I promise you, you know, it forced this country, when we couldn't go out anywhere, when we couldn't watch sporting events, go to concerts, it forced all of us to see how bad of a situation. When we saw that Derek Chauvin with his knee on George Floyd's neck, I think what it did was it was a wake-up call for this entire country. And we've received that wake-up call, and we can't go back to sleep. We have to be able to come up with some type of remedy, some type of strategies. We can't talk about this and just move on next week to another topic. This is the topic that it has to be continuations. You guys have to continue inviting other civil rights attorneys and other attorneys to speak about this issue until we put this to bed. There's an article right now that shows that African Americans are being killed twice the rate that we were being killed after the George Floyd verdict. You know, you would think after getting a verdict like George Floyd, after getting a verdict like in the Botham Jean case, that, you know, people would learn from it. And they say, you know, I don't want to put myself in that position. But I'm telling you, every time there is a guilty verdict against a police officer, for some reason, it seems like the numbers spike up and the numbers continue to rise. The number of individuals who are being killed by police officers. And again, we aren't saying that all police officers are bad, but the ones who are bad are really bad. And those are the ones that we have to get rid of. And the only way there's going to be some change, and I say this again, Black police officers have an obligation to speak up on this issue as well. They cannot be quiet about this because they know what's going on. And the people who are part of the system needs to speak up to say that we need to have a change. There needs to be change. Keenan, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a police officer in New Orleans. And he said, you know, we really don't have a lot of officer-involved shootings in New Orleans. And I started to think about it. And one of the reasons is a lot of the officers are reflective of the communities that they're in. Exactly. And they know the community and they know the people out there. And you know, there have been situations, the guys that tell you, I've been confronted with a situation, if I used deadly force, I probably would have been justified in using it. But because deadly force is not the first option for us, we believe in talking to people and treating people like human beings, that we don't use our guns as much. And that's what I think we need to happen. We having more Black judges, but we need to have more Black police officers. We need to have more Black prosecutors. We just need to have more.
Absolutely. You're dead on. I was when you mentioned Black police officers and making that decision to use deadly force, it really brings up the notion. I kind of mentioned it earlier. Restraint is often shown when you see humanity, right? There's this movement I've read, sadly, and I'll call it sadly, a lot of my cases, there's several prominent blogs and websites dedicated to policing in the Chicago area, and I'm sure they're all over the country. You know, one of the things that we don't talk about a great deal is the police union and its power. So what other union, if you think about it, can insulate against the most egregious of harms? Laquan McDonald here in Chicago was shot 16 times in the back. And the police union was unwilling to say, okay, Jason Van Dyke was wrong.
Right.
Right. And the police union in this country has gotten to a point where they've created this amazing us versus them mentality.
Correct.
And it is absolutely critical of folks in the community they view to be opposite them. And sadly, that's typically, they look at my nephews or look at my nieces or my daughters or many of your nieces and daughters, nephews and sons as being inherently, because of the way they're dressed, because of the location they're in, as being an absolute threat to them.
Right.
And they think that this is ingrained. I read this article. It's called Confessions of a Bastard Cop. Excuse the language. This guy was trained in the LA Police Department in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this is what he talked about. It's a long kind of essay piece. But one of the things he talked about, he said in the academy, they purposely set up a scenario where someone did something, a cadet did something that was wrong. And then they told the other cadets, hey, completely anonymously, we need you to tell us what happened. And if a cadet or a group of cadets told on their fellow cadet, they didn't keep it anonymous. They literally paraded them in front of the entire class to teach the officers about loyalty above honesty. Right. So somebody just put that article in the chat, and then it's an amazing essay. I recommend everyone read it. Thank you very much, Sarah. To tell you about the mentality of police officers. And I'm not saying this is across the board. LAPD has its own sordid history, but that mentality of us against them, the militarization, that when we go out here, we've got to have each other's backs, even if it means turning a blind eye to misconduct. And that's what it often means. And Daryl mentioned African-American officers. I think this is true of women officers. This is true of Latino officers, of Asian officers. Often they're put upon even a greater burden because we all know that historically policing skewed toward white males. And so then you got to kind of prove yourself, right? To say, I'm one of the guys. I can be trusted. I'm shocked sometimes, even in the face of body cameras everywhere, the face of traffic cameras, cell phones everywhere. I'll read a report and I'm like, this doesn't even make common sense to a third grader that you wrote that this happened. And I've got video that makes it clear it never happened this way. But they'll get 5 or 6 officers to sign off on that because they know their union will protect them. A prosecutor might protect them. A city attorney might protect them. And ultimately, sadly, a jury might protect them. Right. That Kim Porter case up in Minnesota, I don't know how possibly you can walk away from that case without at least finding that she was reckless and that deemed that to be a manslaughter case.
Absolutely.
So we're at about our point where I think I'm supposed to toss it over back to Janessa. Is that right? I heard my phone buzz a second ago. And you don't want to get us to going. We're almost as bad as Black preachers. So I will toss it back to Janessa, and we both, I'll speak on Daryl's behalf. We appreciate you having us and engaging in the discussion with us.
And Janessa, if I could just say just really quick, Keenan, man, it has been a delight to serve on this panel with you. You're a sharp brother. So you made it very easy for me to participate on this, man. And just, bro, keep on doing what you're doing. You ever need to call me and keep fighting, man. So I will say it, man, I'm proud of the work that you're doing.
And the sentiment is the same about you and the work that you've done, not only on the high profile cases, but like you said, those smaller cases that nobody ever hears about. So much respect.
Thank you.
Thank you both so very much, Attorney Washington and Saulter, as well as the many of you on with us this evening, and those of you who took time to provide questions beforehand so that we would have the opportunity to listen to a conversation between two dynamic, accomplished civil rights attorneys. In less than an hour, they told us how important it is for the community to show up to trials, how important it is for us to be on the jury, not learn how to get off of the jury. They talked about how to behave during traffic stops. They talked about qualified immunity, critical race theory, charities that we can support in our communities, not just the ones that are providing civil law support, but other support as well that those who may not have access to justice need. They talked about the need for more Black, brown, and female police officers and prosecutors in less than an hour. I cannot believe how much the breadth of the conversation that you guys had. I want, on behalf of my chapter president, Golene Lawrence, the Social Action Chair, Renee Thompson, the Social Action Committee, as well as the members of the Bloomington Normal Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. We thank you so very much for your expertise, for your time, and for the work that you are doing in our communities. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Before you log off, I'm going to ask you, when you log off, a survey will pop up. It will take you about 2 minutes to complete. As I said earlier, this is our third in a series of community conversations. We would like for you to complete the survey and give us your feedback on this conversation and future conversations. And with that, it is 7 p.m. We start on time, we end on time. Thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate you all.